Hello and welcome to our March meetup of Talking Research, this time on asking better questions. Well, this is a bit awkward. We have two fascinating talks for you, but are going to sound a bit different from one another. This was a live in-person meetup, but we had some tech issues at the beginning of the recording, so we had to do another recording of the first talk. So you're going to hear a new recording of Shai's talk and then Adam's talk as recorded during the in-person meetup. Our first talk is by Shai Passal. Shai is a user experience researcher at Meta. Before joining Meta, she spent 2 years at a startup named Taylor Brands, where she started a UX research function as the first researcher in the company. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology, which is an important point for her talk, because she's going to talk about learnings from clinical psychology to improve our user interviews. Enjoy.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Shai, and today we're going to be talking about learnings from clinical psychology to improve our user interviews. Let me just check that everything is working and we can start. Okay. Perfect. So let's start with a story. A few weeks ago, I signed up for an ergonomic consultation. I was very excited about it. I can use the help. So the consultant said to meet her at my desk. She interviewed me, asked me a lot of questions. She had me show her how I go about a few tasks. And then she said that the best solution for me would be to make sure that my chair is in a specific height, that my table is in a specific height, and to get one of those laptop things that make your computer higher so I'm not looking down. With all due respect, I'll probably never use any of these things that she really thoughtfully offered, because I never actually used my desk. And I wasn't intentionally lying, but something happened there. And as I was thinking back and trying to understand what it was that happened, I remembered these small signals I was picking up on, like her looking at her watch a lot. I guess she was reading messages and things like that, that just made me realize at some point that maybe now is not the best time for this awkward revelation that although I look like a serious person, I actually work like this. I was embarrassed. Just like user interviews, she was really trying to understand my needs and my pains and tailor the best solution. But because her understanding was way off, the solution that she offered is not a good fit and will never be used. That exactly is what we want to avoid, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So a few years ago, or a lifetime ago, I was an intern in clinical psychology. I was working at a clinic, and as part of my responsibilities, other than having patients of my own, I had to do what's called intakes. These are initial assessment sessions where you meet someone for the first time and you essentially have 50 minutes to go through their entire life story, get a correct diagnosis, and offer a fitting treatment plan. In a way, this is similar to user interviews where we have a short amount of time, usually one session, and there's a lot that we want to learn about this person. Now, in an imaginary world, we just come in, ask the person, what does he need? What does he want? His pains are? And he'd give us the full and authentic answer right away. In reality, this does not work like that. People have a lot of barriers to sharing what they actually think or believe, especially when they meet us for the first time. This could be from a number of reasons. It could be that they're not aware of some of the things. It could be that they are aware, but it's hard to articulate or to put into words. It could be that it ties into an emotional place that's hard to discuss. It could be that they're afraid of sounding stupid, so they don't want to share some of the things, or that they're just trying to please us by telling us what we want to hear or what they think we want to hear. No matter what the reason is, if we end up relying on signals that are not authentic and are not real, we're at risk of developing products that aren't aligned with what our users need. So in other words, we'd be spending a lot of time, a lot of money on something that no one will actually need or use. And you may say, okay, this is understandable when it comes to therapy, where people are expected to come in and share their biggest fears. But here we're talking about user research, we're talking about a product or on usability tests. It's not the same. And to answer that, I like to share one of my favorite quotes, reading, "We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are." So even if our interviews don't touch on something that we would consider sensitive, it still could tie into a personal sensitivity or insecurity. For example, when we ask people about tools that they use for work, we can be surfacing imposter syndrome. When we ask about financial products, we can be surfacing complex relationships with money. Money is never just money, so this could be beliefs about success, attitudes about stability, and so on. So what can we do? Today, I'd like to share a framework inspired by my training, and these are things that I consider when I approach user interviews to mitigate some of these barriers that we discussed. I do want to take a moment to clarify, I do not suggest using any therapy techniques on our participants. I do not think we should be eliciting any distress. This is not our place. But I do think that there's a lot that we can learn from psychology to help us elicit open and honest feedback and to help us be aware and make sense of processes that we might see. So these are the three elements we're going to be talking about, and we're going to have a taste of each because we only have a short time today. So investing in building rapport, being mindful of defense mechanism, and facilitating in-depth introspection. Let's start with investing in building rapport. Across theories in clinical psychology, there is a common agreement that the secret sauce is the rapport, is the connection that's built in the room. In interviews, we expect participants to come in and be authentic and share whatever they feel or believe, but that requires a lot of trust. And that is not something that we can expect. It's something that we have to earn. It's our job to encourage honesty and authenticity in sharing by creating an environment that's safe, that's non-judgmental, that's authentic, that's empathic. And even if we have a short time for our session, that's not something that we can skip. So what can we do? When a person comes in to participate in a user interview, he's coming into a situation that he does not know a lot about, and that could be overwhelming. So the first step to establish trust is to take the time to reduce uncertainty by explaining what is the situation he arrived at, what's going to be expected of him, what are the inputs that we're looking for. And we have to put an emphasis on the things that are expected that are different than what he might be used to in other social interactions. So for example, we have to give permission to not be polite or nice. This is something that is expected in social interactions, but here we don't want to encourage it because we want to get both positive and negative feedback. And to give permission here, we really want to give the person some kind of framework or some kind of example to work with so he knows what we're talking about and what we're looking for. So we can say something like, I would be really happy if you can share if anything that you see today is confusing, is useless, is ugly. That would be really helpful because I can go ahead and improve it. Or I can give that extra permission to say negative things by saying, I didn't create anything that you're going to see today myself. So if you love it, I'm not flattered. If you hate it, I'm not insulted. I just really want to understand what you think. Another thing that we want to do to create trust is to take the time to acknowledge and diffuse the power dynamic. When we come into an interview as the person asking the question and as the person holding the incentive, we are in a power position. And we want to diffuse that because we don't want the participant to stay through something that's uncomfortable. We don't want him to keep answering just to please us. So we really want to take the time to thank him and explain what a big role he has in our interview today. We're here to learn from him, to learn about his experience. So we actually couldn't have done this without him. He's helping us. Another thing that we can do to give back control is to make sure that we're very clear that if there's something that the participant doesn't want to answer, if he needs a break, if he needs to stop altogether, that's totally in his control, and he only has to tell us. Another thing we can do to build that relationship and build that trust is use mirroring, or to be correct, a part of the mirroring technique. And here I'm talking about mimicking the other person, the participant. It could be mimicking his body language. It could be the way he speaks, his facial expressions, and so on. And mimicking is a way to show that we're similar. And because people tend to like what's similar to them, this creates a sense of closeness and connection. I know it can sound weird, but this is actually something that we do in social interaction unconsciously. And here we're just going to choose to do that on purpose. So what can you do? You can match the way that you speak, so your pace and your volume of speaking. You can subtly lean into the same direction, so forward or backward. And you can also mimic words, so start using some of the terms that the participant is using. And this, other than creating that closeness, could be a really great technique to follow up and highlight something and ask further. So for example, let's say that someone says, I tried this app, but it was kind of confusing. So we can say back to him, kind of confusing? Question mark? Without saying question mark? Next element we're going to be talking about is being mindful of defense mechanism. As I'm giving a talk related to clinical psychology, it's only expected of me to mention Freud. So let's mention Freud and get that out of the way. Freud and then other theorists after him argued that people use unconscious psychological strategies that we learn to rely on when we're facing emotions that are unpleasant. So that could be anxiety, guilt, shame, anything that we don't really want to feel. And these can be viewed as biases that can show up in user interviews and impact the accuracy and validity of the information that we gather. One thing that can trigger defense mechanisms is when our self-concept is being threatened. Our self-concept is the way that we describe and perceive who we are. So for example, someone can describe himself as tech savvy, as someone that's very focused on his health. And if anything happens to threaten that perception psychologically, that person would be inclined to take action through different strategies. How can we see this in research? I think an example that a lot of us probably saw is when someone is really struggling with our product. And then when we ask about it, he'd say something like, oh, it's super simple. It's super easy to understand. There's no problems. That could be because having difficulties clash with his perception of himself as someone who's tech savvy or smart. In this case, it's really clear that we can't just call it a day, say the product is great, and go home. something else is happening. In other cases, it's not as clear. Another example would be if we're talking to someone that defines himself as someone that really prioritizes his health, and we'd be asking him about his eating habits, he would be more inclined to tell us about the healthy things that he eats and omit some of the things that are not as healthy. Another process that we can see in research is rationalization. This is a defense mechanism in which people justify their behavior or feeling with rational and acceptable explanations instead of acknowledging the underlying motivations and impulses. How can we see this in research? For example, we're still talking with a person before, this healthy person, and he told us that he chose to eat a donut. And we ask him, why did he choose the donut? He might say, because this was the most cost-effective option. Okay, so weighted in the cost, weighted in what he's getting, and decided this would be the best option, instead of acknowledging something that's more impulsive. And the bottom line here is just to think through where there's more room for this kind of bias and be mindful of this, both when we ask the questions and when we interpret the data. So what can we do here? One thing that we can do is use the self-distancing technique. This is a way to help participants address attitudes or feelings in a way that's less threatening by letting them put it on someone else. So, for example, try to think about your friends or about your parents. Do you think they'll have any concerns about this? So it's not you that's concerned, it's someone else. Or try to think about people who aren't as good with technology. Is there anything that you think might confuse them? Again, it's them. And this we incorporate after we go through all of our questions in an open and non-biased way. Another great use of this technique is, again, at the end, after we've asked all our questions, when we want to start probing into some of our hypotheses. So instead of just going ahead and asking, we can say something like, some people that I interviewed this week mentioned that they struggled with this, or that they had some concerns about this. What is your take on that? What do you think on that? Another thing that is very important is to make sure that we're phrasing the questions so that the judgment is not on the person, never on the person. We'd be just calling for bias. If there has to be any judgment at all, we should make sure it's only on the product. So instead of asking, to what extent is it easy for you to understand? We can ask, to what extent is this feature or thing that I'm showing you clear or confusing? Okay, so if there's a problem, the problem is not the person, it's always the product. And in general, just try to avoid anything that requires a person to judge or assess himself. So avoid any question like, do you consider yourself something? Do you consider yourself a healthy person? Or do you care about something? Again, just calling for bias. Another thing to consider is that there's more ways, more entry points to an experience than just asking about what people think or why they did something or having them self-report. There are other entry points to this experience that we can use, and we can take inspiration from the CBT triangle elements to do so. So here we have not only thoughts, but also behaviors and feelings, and these are all thought to be connected and affect each other. So we can use each of these to learn more. For example, we can have people show us their process, show us their behavior to tap into that element of behavior. And we can ask about their emotional reaction to tap into that element. And when it comes to emotions, participants might tell us about their emotional experience, not only with words, but also with nonverbal cues. And this is very common in cultures that are more pleasing, or people that are more pleasing. so that even though we said in the beginning, we want to hear their honest thoughts and feelings, they still struggle with that. So if we see them laughing in an embarrassed way, or we notice them kind of moving uncomfortable in their chair, we notice brows going up, we can acknowledge that and try to ask and see if they're willing to discuss. So we can say something like, it seems like something is a bit confusing. It seems like something is a bit uncomfortable. Do you mind telling me more about it? And even if we see something, but we're not sure what exactly is it or how exactly to label it with a name of an emotion, we can send that question in a nonverbal way as well. So something like, it seems like something is a bit, kind of signaling something is a bit off. And do you mind telling me a bit about it? And the person would probably be able to pick up on that and tell you some more. The last element that we're going to be discussing today is facilitating in-depth introspection. I know I just said thoughts are not everything, but they are a big element of what we're doing in user interviews. And we want to make sure that we're getting not only superficial inputs. And we can help participants articulate and reflect on their experience, on their mental models, on their decision-making, on their behaviors, to make sure that they're giving us feedback that's more comprehensive and more detailed. To address this, I like to take inspiration from Rogers. He was the founder of the client-centered therapy, and we can see his quote here saying, "It is the client who knows what hurts, what directions to go, what problems are crucial." He believed that the client, that's his name for the patient, is the one that knows his experience best, and for that reason, he should be the one leading the sessions. So how can we apply that? The first thing to do is to make sure that we're always coming in with a curious mindset. We're always coming in really wanting to understand this person's unique experience and unique pains and unique way of seeing the world. Now, we might already have some kind of idea of how people approach these things that we're going to explore. It could be because we have a personal experience with that, how we go about it. It could be that we already interviewed a few people and we learned a few things for them. We have to be very careful to not use that as context to fill in the gaps in our knowledge, because we might be missing this unique person's experience. So we still have to probe, we still have to ask the follow-up questions, we still have to ask for the details as if we know nothing about this. And this includes asking about main processes, about terms, about jargon, about reasoning, asking about everything and putting all of our assumptions aside. Let's look at an example here. Again, we're talking about food. And the participant says, "Sometimes I cook, but usually I order takeout. I feel really bad about it." I'll read it again. "Sometimes I cook, but usually I order takeout. I feel really bad about it." Probably all of us or most of us have some kind of image in our mind as to what this person is talking about when he says, "I order takeout." What is this thing he's doing? Maybe we have an app in our mind. Maybe it's a specific blue app. But that does not mean that this is what this person is talking about. Okay, for him, maybe ordering takeout is calling the restaurant on the phone. Maybe ordering takeout is his inside joke, and what he means is that he's going to have another family member cook for him. If this is something that's crucial for our study, we really have to ask in order to know. We can't make any of these assumptions. We might be missing out and developing the wrong solution. The same goes to, I feel really bad about it. What does he feel bad about? There could be so many options. Again, we probably have something in mind. It doesn't mean that that's what this person has in mind. So some follow-ups here. When you said you feel bad about it, what did you mean? Or walk me through the last time you ordered takeout, so we know what is this process he's talking about. Or if an app is mentioned, I'm not familiar with this app. Can you tell me a bit more about it? And this can sound a little obvious, but it does become challenging after we have interviewed a few people. We started connecting the dots. We start seeing themes emerge. Okay, and we feel like we have this understanding. But we have to remember that there could be a lot of different whys. And I can share that one of my most impactful findings in the past happened when I was able to lean into this and to kind of ignore feeling stupid and asking obvious questions. I was trying to understand pain points in the process of starting a small business. And as I was interviewing participants, they mentioned these terms that have to do with bureaucracies. And I was thinking to myself, okay, bureaucracies, let's move on. And we moved on to the parts where I hypothesized the problems are and like the meatier parts are. And only after several participants kept bringing up these names of bureaucracies, I stopped, asked the questions from scratch. What is this? What is this name? What did you have to do? What did this include? And I ended up finding a huge problem space, and the team ended up developing a solution, so a product specifically to help with that problem. What else? Don't dismiss things as off topic prematurely. So, a lot of times, participants start talking about something that kind of seems not to really answer our question the way we imagined it. Or in usability tests, they would start doing something that seems off track. It's totally up to us to stop them and bring them back to our agenda. But before we do so, we should stop, take a look, where are they leading us? And decide if that's something that could be valuable or could be an insight, teach us something about their mental models or the way that they see the world. If we force our agenda or if we force the limits of the problem space to what we think it is, we might be missing out on other important pains or just something that would be really important for us to know about this person's point of view. Another thing that we can do to get more elaborated answers is pause. If we keep jumping to the next question, jumping to the next topic, filling in every second, we're missing on richer information. We have to remember that the participant doesn't come with us to our daily meetings about this topic. He might need time to reflect. He might need time to think through. Maybe he's just looking to see how much information we're waiting to get from him. And if it looks like we're just ticking a box, he'll just stop giving us the full and detailed answers. So this again could sound obvious, but it is a struggle in real time. When the clock is ticking, we still have a long list of questions. And what we can do here is use brief intentional silence to elicit and encourage participants to elaborate and provide more details. And here, I know it sounds kind of terrifying, but I'm not talking about anything that's long or dramatic. Okay, I'm just talking about a brief silence. Studies show that 4 seconds are already considered a long, awkward silence. Okay, so just pausing, taking the time, letting them think through, and then moving on. And the last thing that we're going to be talking about, don't answer participants' questions right away. I know this is weird. This is not what we're used to in social interactions. When someone asks us a question, we feel uncomfortable not answering. A lot of the times, these are questions about our products or our features, and we really want to help this person and tell him that we do have that feature and it could be really helpful. We have to resist that urge because questions are such a great opportunity to learn what's top of mind for our participant. So instead of answering, we have to flip that question around to learn more and get more information. So instead of saying, sure, we have that feature, let me show you, we can say, can you tell me more about what you were wondering? How would this be helpful? Okay, to learn more. And again, it's weird, and I tend to acknowledge that it's weird and say something like, I know it's annoying that I can't answer your questions, and I would love answering everything at the end, but I really want to make sure that I understand what you're asking. Can you tell me a bit more about it? Just acknowledge that. Okay, so we discussed these three elements to help us better think and approach our user interviews. This is, of course, something we can talk about for hours. And I think interviewing is really a muscle that we have to strengthen. There's a lot of trying and failing here. And I really hope that each of you found something that you would like to try applying and see if it fits your toolkit. And I think the bottom line is just to keep being aware, thinking through, and doing whatever we can to make sure that we're getting the most authentic signals to help our teams develop solutions that are going to be helpful and useful. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay. So our next speaker is Adam. Adam is a senior researcher at Google. Before joining Google, he spent a couple of years as a research lead at Booking. And also, interesting, Adam has a PhD in sociology from Stanford. So, amazing. In his spare time, he likes skiing, which I do as well. We should talk about it next time, go together, okay? And spending time with his nephews and nieces. And before he's going to talk about question-driven research, he's going to tell us what is the longest word in the Oxford Dictionary. Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Here. See, I'll just leave this behind my back. Thanks, sorry. All right, we're gonna sort this out. Don't worry. Okay, the longest word in the Oxford English Dictionary. Can everybody at home hear me? Oh, now I can hear myself better. All right, the longest word in the Oxford English Dictionary is pneumano-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. I'll say it one more time. Pneumano-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. It's an infection of the lungs caused by inhaling volcanic ash. So thank you all for all the people here for coming today. That's really awesome to see so many people. Huge thank you to Sigal and Ori Kraft and Ofer Senderi and Oren Shapira for organizing. And especially, I don't know how many Autodesk people there are here, but it's really important to say all of this is because of Sigal. Like all of this, not just today, all the meetups. Sigal, you are a superstar for all of us. So today is actually one of my favorite days of the year. It's the vernal equinox, which means that starting from today for the next 6 months, all of the days will have more daylight than nighttime. It's also in the way Americans write the calendar. Today is 3-2-1-2-3, so that's cool. And it's also the very day that I had my bar mitzvah years ago, which has nothing to do with anything, just letting you know some interesting things. And so now let's talk about something that has nothing to do with that and more to do with stuff near and dear to our hearts, which is research. And in particular, what I want to get into is the deep foundations of what we do as researchers and research conductors. And let's start by talking about some situations that all of us may have experienced at one point or another. So maybe this resonates with you. Many of us have experienced working with others, with stakeholders and teams who are newer to research. They may not have a sense of the scope of research or how or where it fits into product development. They may not know how to utilize it or when's the best time to enact research. Let's call this the cloudiness issue, because it's when things are a little bit foggy and hard to see through. The reality is that UX research is still rather new in Israel, in Tel Aviv in Israel. And so it makes sense that this is going to be relevant in a lot of our organizations. Similarly, when research is newer, it's not uncommon for familiarity with research to be in relation mostly to one known component of it, like one method, probably usability testing in most cases. Let's call this the narrowness issue. When what we experience is an existing but a limited sense of research and how to utilize it. I'm going to move this over because you can see that I'm reading some notes, right? So let me look at you while I'm doing it. All right. Perhaps what we've encountered is research asks that are too specific, right? The asks come in with a desired product outcome, such as whether a metric will go up or down, or they may come in already with a metric in mind, such as a specific request. Can we do a usability test? Can we do a survey? This may be related to the narrowness issue, where having a sense of the scope and the utilization of research leads to very specific asks. Having a limited sense of the scope and how to utilize research leads to limited asks. Let's call this the overbaked issue, okay? What I'll do today is try and help resolve these issues. I suggest, and what I use in my real day-to-day is a different approach. For those who work with researchers, I hope that this gives a look that I hope can enable you to leverage research effectively within your teams and to help your teams to really make the most of research. For those who conduct research, I hope that this gives some tips and strategies that you can give to the teams that you work with, tools that you can use to partner and to amplify the impact of your work. And I'll start where I always start. If there's one takeaway that I hope you'll remember, it's this. The best way to consider how and when research can be impactful is to think in questions and problems rather than solutions or methods. At its core, question-driven research is a framework to assist product teams in thinking through questions and unknowns and knowledge gaps and letting everything flow from there. And as you'll see, questions is a theme that I'm going to keep returning to over and over again in lots of different ways. So I mentioned 3 issues, and now I'm going to briefly tell you, I'm going to talk about 3 solutions, right? I'll start by talking about communicating the value props of research as a way to address the cloudiness issue. The goal here is not to help our colleagues understand everything there is to know about research, but to help them understand the high-level value and to gain a sense that research can fit anywhere in product development. Then I'll get into the overbaked issue. Now, if you have a good memory, you'll remember that I talked about the overbaked issue as the 3rd issue, not the 2nd one. And you're right, if you remember that. Here, what I'm going to recommend is proactively resolving that issue in order to help then also resolve the 2nd issue, the narrowness issue. I'm going to talk about orienting towards questions, or how to introduce methods as an outcome of asking questions. And then I'll go back and I'll talk about how we can assist teams in finding, formulating, and asking questions by reframing the conversation to something simple. Identify the problem, focus on the question, and everything will flow from there. So let's jump in. Like any product, a user should have a clear sense of value props to know why or when they'd use a product. Now, our colleagues aren't users, but the core still stands. With a better sense of value prop, there's a better sense of when and why someone might utilize research, right? So this gets to the simplest questions in the cloudiness issue. Why do research? Or maybe the other version that you've heard of, is research really necessary? So first, let me start by giving some quick stats. And you'll see why I'm giving these. Why spend our time doing this? Well, because time is valuable. Product development can or cannot be insights informed before any programming and before any A/B testing has started. And a product's chance of succeeding can get a boost early on. And this isn't just pep talk, this is real. According to the Institute for Electrical Engineering, which is the world's largest, biggest, most prominent engineering professional organization in the world, 50% of developers' time is spent on rework that actually is avoidable. And more than that, the cost of fixing something after development instead of before is actually 100 times higher. What we're talking about here is not something small. We're talking about billions of dollars worth of resources. We're talking about billions of dollars worth of churn or reduced sales. We're talking about real numbers here. So setting up for success in advance, which is essentially what research does, actually pays off, like for real pays off. So the question of why to do research has a clear answer. It saves our organizations, and of course, it saves our colleagues time. Who wants to go back and redo stuff when they don't have to? The other question is a little bit more logistical. When is a good time to do research? Okay, this is a very simplified version of a product lifecycle. Okay, very simplified. When our colleagues ask when to do research, the underlying question may actually be where. Where here should I do research? Where does it fit in product development? When I said questions would be coming up all over this talk in different ways, I meant it. Even before we get to research, at the most basic level, product development is about two questions. The first question is, what should we build? In the early phases of product development, when a product's at the start of its life cycle, this is an important question to ask, because building a product that doesn't have a use case or building a product that doesn't have a meaningful user base is already setting a product up not to succeed before it's even started. In later phases, the question is, how should we build it? This is when product development needs to determine how to get a product right so that it meets the user need or that it's attractive to the intended user base. And not nailing this can also set up a product for limited success. When we flesh this out slightly further by thinking of product life cycle stages, we might think of a few phases. An early phase where product development requires making the big decisions about what should be built, the phase that is next moved into of building and assessment, and then once a product is released, the ongoing iteration where teams try to make a product better or more useful or more up to date with evolving needs. And there's also corresponding questions here, right? In the early phases, we ask what and why are we building? In the middle, we say, is what we're building well positioned to succeed? And later on, depending on whether those middle stages succeeded or not, we'll say, why didn't it succeed? Or what should we focus on next? All of these are ripe for research. They're not yet research questions, but they're all questions that are ripe for research. So where does research fit in the product development life cycle? It can fit before there's a product. It can fit, well, the product is being thought out and fleshed out, designed. It can be, well, then a product is being built, iterated. Basically, research fits everywhere. There's no single right time for research. There are many right times. So what are the value props? Better product development with products more set up for success and less fixing and rework. And also, on our side, a better sense for the people that we work with of what, why, whether, and how to work with research at all stages of product lifecycle. It's a good value prop, right? But that's just the hook. How do you actually use this? What's next? So that brings us to the next part. All of that I just said can be really confusing if you're an individual who has sort of a narrow sense of research, a narrow sense of what research is. How can research do so much across the whole product lifecycle if all it is usability testing? Doesn't make sense, right? So, you've probably heard of the sort of more literal euphemism or metaphor of construction that engineers use a lot, like the kind of the code building as a kind of a metaphor in real building. I actually like it for research. To build a building requires laying a foundation, constructing a structure, maintenance even after it's built. A builder may know how to do each of these different parts, but does them differently. And that's also the case with product development. In each of the phases we've discussed, research has something, but something different to contribute, right? And for each part of this, the builder will use different tools. In our case, as people who conduct research, we'll use different tools. When it seems like the builder only has a screwdriver it's hard to imagine she's going to be able to cut through a piece of wood. So resolving the narrowness issue is really about increasing awareness of all the tools that people who conduct research have. In fact, question-driven research is really a relational thing. It's needing a different approach to methods-driven research. And now it's common to kind of see the attempted answer response to this as introducing stakeholders to a bunch of methods. Now, what I aim to do is actually also give stakeholders a peek into our processes. But I'm going to give it a twist here. In that what I do is I introduce it through the lens of questions, because the reality is that we, people who conduct research, we don't start with methods, we start with questions. Right? So here's where I start. What we do as research conducting people is we take a question or problem and we consider it according to several dimensions. These dimensions speak to the nature of where to look for an answer. Do we know what people think? Do we need to know what people think? Or do we need to know what they do? Do we need to know about how and why, or about how many? The other part of this determination has to do with whether we're looking for depth or breadth. Breadth is scale. It's looking for patterns across customers. Its primary benefit is generalizability, but its primary limitation is that it's not really so well suited for knowing why things happen, just what happened. Depth allows us to find that why. It's attaining a nuanced understanding of how and why people do the things that they do. And this is good for understanding the root causes of things. You can actually map methods along these dimensions, and actually I will, but the directions provided by a map only help when you know what you're looking for. So we can start by considering where questions fit first. In each quadrant, we have types of questions. We have questions about user behavior over here in the behavioral quantitative quadrant. Questions about who and what, and who in this case meaning like which segments, and what are they doing, and where are they going wrong? You know, what's going on in the flow? Where's drop-off occurring? Over here, we have user behavior related to how and why in the behavioral qualitative segment. Why are the things that we saw happening? How are they happening? How are people trying to do things? Or how is it that their behavior, that they're going about processes that is causing these things to happen? We also have attitudinal quadrants, where qualitative attitudinal has a lot to do with consumer response to stimuli, to things that people are seeing, or attitudinal and quantitative, which is a lot about markets. I'm going to sort of stop talking about this at a high level and use a real example. I wanted to show how this can be used with real research. So last week, I asked some of you who are here today for examples of asks that you've received in the course of doing research. And one of the folks here today told me about this one. This person told me about an ask where they were asked from stakeholders about a promotion that was launched to get more people to use a feature, and was told the promotion's not working. And the ask is, how can we get it to work? Now notice, this is phrased as a question, but this is not a research question. This is an outcome question, right? How can we get this to work is an outcome question. So what's the research question? This is exactly actually why I like this example, because this is the kind of product question that can have a variety of research questions. We could be asking, what actually is not working? Ooh, I didn't even notice there's a mouse there the whole time. Sorry about that, everyone. What isn't working? Which predicted outcomes are not occurring? Is it about feature uptake, engagement, growth? Maybe about just what's not working is the amount of impressions that the promotion's getting? Or maybe the question is, can users effectively understand the promotion? Can they succeed in utilizing it? Or the question could be, how might potential consumers respond to how it's being offered? Or it might be, do consumers even want what's being offered? Or even if they want it, do they need it? Now, notice actually, and when I'm talking about users and when I'm talking about consumers, because they're actually two different things, even for us as researchers, is that sometimes we're talking about our app users, but especially, or our product users, our not necessarily app, website, whatever it is, physical products, but sometimes we're talking about consumers, right? We're talking about a market. And those different directions could be relevant, and each falls into a different dimension. So let's go ahead and plot them. We have a quantitative behavioral question. What's happening in our product specifically? We would need to go through our data to know this. We want to lean into things that are happening at high rates, learn about those things, and see actually where is there something going wrong. Hold this question in mind because I'm actually going to come back to it. So put a little bookmark or check mark on this one. I'm going to come back to it in a couple minutes. We have a qualitative behavioral question, the why behind the what. If we know what is kind of happening wrong, why? Why is it happening wrong? We have a qualitative attitudinal question. This is very relevant in a case like promotions, where something like attractiveness or other sort of basic causes of interest or disinterest that matter to people in order to make them engaged or not actually could be at the root of what's going on. Or there's a quantitative attitudinal question, and a really important one. Consider an oversaturated market, a market that has too many of a product, too many competitors, too many different types. Offering something that people have plenty of won't get much attention or interest. So we can take that base question and go in a lot of different directions, right? Depending on what is actually the thing that we need to find out. Now, here's where we get to the actual methods. Methods also plot along these dimensions. In our real day today, once we've established that what kind of knowledge a question requires to be answered, that's when we go to pick our method. That's for real. That's what all of us do, right? Someone tell me if this is not what you do first. You don't, so maybe there was a hand in the way there. Okay. And we pick it, and what we pick is based on what question we need to answer. Since each of the methods that we use is tailored to getting a particular type of information and insight, they can be helpful, but in different situations, depending on what question needs to be answered. And together, these make our insights toolkit. Showing how questions translates into methods helps the folks that we work with to see methods as tools in our toolbox. We pick and use the right one for the right job. Back to that builder metaphor. This is saying to our stakeholders, it's saying there's no need to request a specific tool. Make a request to the builder for a thing. What is it that you want built? The builder has many tools to choose from, and she'll choose the right one when she knows what job she needs to get done. By the way, why insights? Remember I asked you to hold on to bookmark that thing, that upper quadrant? Okay, so some knowledge gaps are not necessarily filled by UX researchers. No, for real. In fact, part of being a researcher can be that identifying when a question should be answered by using an approach that's more often the expertise of another discipline, especially when we're talking about up here, data analysis, A/B testing. Maybe it's another role that is actually executing the thing. But what we can do by taking this approach is actually finding out, hey, the best way to answer this question is this other method and this other person who's an expert in doing it. I actually like that because this is saying, look, this is for everything. This is why it's an insights toolkit and not just a research toolkit, right? I'm going to throw in something else that I hope can also be helpful, though it's a bit of a tangent. I'm making all this sound very structured and procedural. And there is good structure, but there's also a layer of instinct here. There's many kinds of ways to break problems into questions, and then many tools that we can use to approach that question, meaning we can turn right or we can turn left. How do we know which way to go? Well, we have history, we have background, we have training, and because of that, we've also made mistakes, and we've learned from those mistakes, and we build a sense of things over time. It's because of this combination of research and instinct that I always like to make sure to bring in that research is very much a combination of art and science. And the truth is, I think a lot of folks that we work with would also say this about their crafts. The methods and processes that we've discussed are a part of the science of research, but that certain instinct, that ability to follow our gut, is when we sort of also know when we might need to break the rules and why in those instances we may want to follow our artist instincts. Why do I like to say that to stakeholders? Because sometimes they see you veering off the path. And it's important to also let them know that, hey, there's also a level of art here. Okay, I'm gonna, in a couple minutes, talk about the last thing. I said resolving the overbaked issue early helps to proactively address the narrowness issue. Here's why. We've already expanded the sense that research can fit into a lot of places in the product lifecycle. We've gotten our teams and our stakeholders on board that it makes sense to kick things off with questions. And at this point, we've actually done most of the work. Yay. Now all we need to do is to get teams to put this into action. This thinking in questions and problems. So let's talk about what this means in practice, or rather how to put it into practice. Here's what I do. It's super simple. I just take it down to a few key things to keep in mind, particularly early on when product teams are thinking about where they're going to go. So in planning cycles, I ask stakeholders to keep two questions in mind. What's already known, and what are the knowledge gaps? That's it. But actually, I can simplify it down even further to a single phrase. We could build better if we knew. This is not a question, but it's phrasing that puts attention on open questions and problems. Take a look. We could build better if we knew which markets have a gap for this type of product. The question is still here. It's just phrased as a problem statement. Reverse it, and you've generated an investigation-worthy question. Which markets have a gap for this product? If we can find that out, we could build better. Let's do a few more. If we could build better if we knew where there's drop-off in the funnel. Back up in that upper quadrant. Hey, but also we could build better if we knew why there's drop-off in the funnel. We could build better if we knew what makes people confuse personalized content with advertising. We could build better if we knew what app users do when network drops. We could build better if we knew what our app users do when network drops. Do they act the same or different as people in general network drop situations? We could build better if we knew what's the most important thing to do next. Seriously, this is actually all you need. Okay, so to summarize, 3 steps we can take. Communicate the value props. Why is research valuable? Orient towards questions. Move things in the direction of asking questions, focusing on those unknowns and the knowledge gaps, and reframe the conversation. Help those we work with remember that the best way to consider how and when research can be impactful is to think in questions and problems rather than solutions and methods. And at the end of the day, remember that we could build better if we knew